War has rules, history has patterns, and military logic says tanks do not sink warships. Yet in the chaos of World War II, something happened that no military academy ever taught, no admiral ever planned for, and no historian expected to record. A single American tank built to fight infantry and other tanks on land did the unthinkable. It destroyed a Japanese warship, not with naval guns, not with torpedoes, but with raw firepower, timing, and pure battlefield chaos. This is the only recorded moment in history where a tank sank a warship, and the story behind it is far more shocking than the headline suggests. The year was 1944. The place was the Pacific Theater, where the ocean itself seemed to be at war with both sides. The island was small, jagged, covered in jungle so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. To the Japanese, this island was a shield, a forward base protecting the homeland. To the Americans, it was a knife pointed at Japan's throat. Control the island and you control the sea lanes. Lose it and the war moves closer to Tokyo. The Japanese Navy anchored a light warship near the coast, tasked with resupply, troop movement, and coastal fire support. They never imagined what would come next, because the threat was supposed to come from the sea. It came from land. Buried near the shoreline, partially camouflaged with mud and palm branches, sat an American M4 Sherman tank. It wasn't special. It wasn't upgraded. It wasn't designed for naval combat. It was just there. The crew was exhausted, sweaty, hungry. They had been fighting for days. Japanese snipers, artillery fire, ambushes from the jungle. Their orders were simple: hold the coastline, stop any landing, support infantry. No one, absolutely no one, said anything about fighting ships. Then the ocean began to move. Just before dawn, the tank commander noticed something strange. A shadow, large, low, silent. Through binoculars, it became clear. A Japanese warship was approaching the shore. Not firing, not maneuvering aggressively. It was coming in close. Too close. This wasn't an attack. It was a resupply mission, troops, ammunition, food. The Japanese believed the coastline was secure. They were wrong. The tank commander's heart started racing. His gunner whispered something no one had ever said before. "Sir, we can see the hull." The warship was so close that individual sailors were visible on deck. The tank's main gun, a 75mm cannon, was never meant to engage steel ships. But steel is steel, and range is range. The commander hesitated. Then he made a decision that would enter history. Load armor piercing. The crew froze, then moved. The tank rotated, slowly, painfully. The gun aligned with the warship's side. The Japanese sailors noticed movement on shore, but too late. Boom! The first shell hit low on the hull. Not catastrophic, but shocking. Metal screamed. Sparks flew. The warship shuddered. Confusion erupted on deck. A tank firing at a ship? That wasn't possible. So the Japanese didn't return fire immediately. That hesitation was fatal. The Sherman fired again, and again. One shell struck near the waterline. Another smashed into an exposed compartment. This wasn't naval combat. This was brute force at point-blank range. The warship's crew scrambled to respond, but its guns were aimed outward to the sea, not inward toward the jungle. The ship tried to reverse. Too late. A shell punched through below the waterline. Seawater flooded in fast. The ship listed. Japanese officers shouted orders. Engines screamed. But damage control couldn't keep up. The tank kept firing, methodically, calmly, each shot more devastating than the last. Then something ignited inside the ship. Ammunition. Fuel. Fire erupted. The warship began to sink. Not from torpedoes. Not from naval guns. But from a land tank. Japanese sailors jumped into the water. Some swam toward shore, straight into American infantry fire. Others vanished beneath the waves. Within minutes, the ship rolled, then disappeared. The ocean swallowed it whole. Silence followed. The tank crew stared in disbelief. They had just done something no one had ever done before, and no one would ever do again. American infantry arrived moments later. They couldn't believe what they saw. Wreckage, oil, bodies, and a Sherman tank still smoking. Word spread fast. Officers wrote reports they could barely explain. How do you describe a tank sinking a warship? You don't. You just record it. There's a reason this moment is unique. Warships learned. Distances increased. Air power dominated coastlines. Navies stopped coming close. and tanks returned to land. But for one moment in World War II, the rules collapsed. A tank ruled the sea. Inside that Sherman were 5 ordinary American soldiers. No heroes on paper, no famous names, no medals waiting for them. They were young, most barely in their 20s. Farm boys, factory workers, men who had never seen the ocean before the war. The tank commander had joined the army to escape poverty. The gunner had never fired a weapon before basic training. The loader still carried a photo of his mother in his pocket. None of them woke up that morning thinking they would challenge naval history. Yet when the moment arrived, they didn't hesitate. That decision separated them from thousands of others who froze under pressure. The Japanese Navy had a strict assumption. Tanks were irrelevant to ships. Their coastal doctrine focused on enemy landing craft, destroyers, submarines, aircraft. A tank firing from shore was not considered a threat. The warship's armor was designed to deflect small-caliber coastal fire, not repeated point-blank armor-piercing shells hitting the same spot. The shoreline was supposed to be safe. That assumption killed the ship. Distance is everything in warfare. At long range, the tank would have been useless. At medium range, ineffective. But the Japanese ship closed in too far, less than a few hundred meters. At that range, the Sherman's 75-throw gun became lethal, not because of penetration, but because of angle and repetition. Each hit weakened the structure. Each crack invited seawater. Each second mattered. The ocean did the rest. One shot changed everything. A shell struck just beneath the ship's waterline, near a vulnerable section where internal compartments met fuel storage. It didn't explode dramatically. Instead, it tore metal open. Seawater rushed inside with unstoppable force. Damage control teams tried to seal it, but flooding spread faster than men could move. Once seawater enters below the waterline, time becomes the enemy. The ship never recovered. Japanese sailors were trained for discipline, but nothing prepared them for this. A tank firing from the jungle, from land, orders overlapped. Commands contradicted. Men ran in every direction. Some tried to man guns. Others tried to abandon ship. Officers screamed for calm. There was none. The ship's engines failed as water reached critical systems. That was the moment everyone aboard realized. They were going down. Inside the Sherman, there was no celebration. No cheering. Only silence. The crew watched the warship listing heavily, smoke pouring from its deck, flames licking the sky. The gunner lowered his sights. The loader stopped reaching for shells. They didn't fire anymore. They didn't need to. The ocean had taken over. Nearby American infantry units rushed toward the shoreline after hearing the explosions. What they saw stopped them cold. A burning wreck, floating debris, oil spreading across the water, a Japanese warship gone, and a single tank parked on the beach. Some soldiers laughed. Others stared. A few shook their heads in disbelief. One infantryman reportedly said, Did a tank just sink that thing? Yes, it did. When officers filed after-action reports, many hesitated. How do you write something that sounds impossible? A Sherman tank engaged and sank an enemy warship. It sounded like exaggeration, like battlefield myth, but evidence floated in the water. The wreckage didn't lie, so why don't we hear this story often? Because it didn't fit the narrative. Naval historians focused on aircraft carriers, battleships, submarines. Tank historians focused on armored battles, breakthroughs, land warfare. This event existed between categories, and history often ignores what doesn't fit neatly. Strategically, the sinking didn't change the war, but tactically, it sent a message. Japanese commanders became cautious about coastal approaches. Resupply missions were delayed. Ships stayed farther offshore. Land forces suffered shortages. One unexpected action created ripple effects. That is how war truly works. Modern warfare eliminated this possibility. Today, ships fire from miles away. Aircraft dominate coastlines. Precision weapons rule the battlefield. A tank would never get that close again. This event could only happen in World War II, during a brief moment when technology, chaos, and human decision overlapped perfectly. A once-in-history window. The crew survived the war. They returned home quietly. No parades, no headlines, no movie deals. Some never spoke about it. Others told it as a strange story. half joke, half disbelief. Only years later did historians confirm what they had done. By then, the men were old, and history had moved on. This story isn't about tanks or ships. It's about adaptation, the ability to recognize opportunity, the courage to act without permission, the refusal to accept that's not how it's done. That mindset wins wars. The American tank involved was not a miracle machine. It was an M4 Sherman, the most common American tank of World War II. Critics called it under-armored, too tall, too vulnerable. It wasn't designed to dominate battleships or challenge naval power. But the Sherman had one strength that mattered that day: reliability. Its gun worked. Its crew trusted it. Its engine didn't fail. And in war, reliability often beats raw power. The Sherman's 75mm gun was designed for infantry support, bunkers, light armor. Not warships, but at close range. Even naval steel can fail, especially when struck repeatedly in vulnerable areas. Unlike naval guns that fire slowly but massively, the Sherman could fire rapidly, adjusting aim after each impact. It wasn't one shell that sank the ship. It was persistence. Japanese light warships of the time prioritized speed and range over armor. They weren't built to absorb punishment near shore. Critical weaknesses included thin hull plating near the waterline, exposed fuel compartments, limited internal compartment sealing. When those weaknesses met direct fire from land, the ship had no margin for error, and it used up that margin fast. Every ship has a fatal line, the water line. Above it, damage can be repaired. Below it, water becomes unstoppable. The tank crew instinctively aimed low, not because of training, but because it made sense. One shell below the waterline can do more damage than 10 above it. That is exactly what happened. Once seawater entered, it didn't come alone. It carried chaos. Electrical systems shorted. Engines overheated. Fuel mixed with sparks. Fire spread through compartments not designed for internal combat damage. Japanese sailors fought the flames desperately, but smoke stole their vision and oxygen. A warship is strong on the outside. Inside, it is fragile. Despite their success, the tank crew was terrified. They knew something the ship's crew didn't. If the warship returned fire, the Sherman would not survive. One direct hit from naval artillery would have erased them instantly. Every second they fired was a gamble. Every pause felt like death waiting. But the ship never fired back. The ship's guns were positioned for anti-aircraft defense. Sea targets. They couldn't depress low enough to target a tank hidden near the shoreline. The turret angles betrayed them. By the time secondary weapons were considered, the ship was already dying. Technology failed strategy. This was not doctrine, not strategy, not planning. It was improvisation. That is why it worked. War schools teach rules. Battlefields reward creativity. As flooding increased, the ship listed heavily. Equipment slid, men fell. Orders dissolved into panic. The final moments weren't loud. They were slow. Metal groaned. Water climbed. The ship leaned, and vanished. The ocean closed over it like nothing had happened. Only smoke remained. After the sinking, there was a strange quiet. No cheering. No shouting. Only waves. The tank crew sat inside their steel shell, breathing hard, hands shaking. They had survived something no one expected. They had done something no one would believe. Senior officers arrived hours later. They examined the shoreline, the shell casings, the oil slick. Questions followed. How close was the ship? How many rounds fired? Are you sure it wasn't already damaged? The crew answered calmly. Yes, yes, no. The evidence spoke louder than words, because it breaks categories. Tanks fight tanks. Ships fight ships. This story violates that logic. And when history violates logic, it often gets buried. But truth doesn't care if it sounds unbelievable. Other tanks fired at ships during the war. None succeeded. The reasons: too much distance, better ship maneuvering, immediate naval retaliation. This event succeeded because everything went wrong for one side and right for the other. A perfect storm. Naval officers didn't advertise this event, but they studied it. Lessons learned. Never approach hostile coastlines casually. Land weapons can be deadly in unexpected ways. Underestimating the enemy kills ships. Those lessons influenced future doctrine. After the battle, the tank crew didn't rest. They returned to combat. More jungle, More ambushes. More losses. The war didn't pause to honor them. It never does. Decades later, historians connected reports, cross-referenced logs, eyewitness accounts, naval losses. The story aligned. A tank had done the impossible. Once. Not because it's strange, but because it proves something timeless. Victory doesn't always belong to the strongest. It belongs to the one who adapts first. Every war has rules. Some written, some unspoken. Tanks fight on land. Ships rule the sea. Aircraft dominate the sky. But war itself doesn't respect rules. It respects opportunity. On that Pacific island, the opportunity appeared for only minutes and vanished forever. One crew recognized it. Everyone else missed it. World War II was a transitional war. Old technology collided with new. Doctrine lagged behind reality. Commanders were learning in real time. Radar was imperfect. Air cover wasn't guaranteed. Ships still approached coastlines closely. That brief technological gap made the impossible possible. Today, that gap no longer exists, which is why this event is locked in time. In today's battlefield, warships strike from dozens of miles away. Satellites track every vehicle. Drones watch every coastline. Missiles replace guns. A tank would be destroyed long before it ever fired. That single Sherman survived because the world had not yet evolved. History closed that door forever. Quietly, without announcements, the Japanese Navy adjusted behavior. Ships stayed farther offshore. Land threats were re-evaluated. Resupply missions changed timing. No official admission was made. But lessons were learned. War punishes arrogance. They didn't become famous for one reason. They didn't seek attention. After the war, they returned to ordinary lives. One worked in construction. Another drove trucks. One became a mechanic. When asked about the war, most said very little. The loudest heroes are often the least real. Real combat stories don't sound heroic. They sound confused, messy, quiet. Inside that tank, no one felt powerful. They felt afraid. Victory doesn't feel like movies show. It feels like survival. The wreck still lies beneath the waves. No monument, no marker, no plaque. The ocean doesn't remember. It only keeps secrets. History survives because humans choose to remember. If not for and after action reports, cross-referenced naval losses, veteran testimony, this story would have vanished. History doesn't preserve everything. It preserves what we fight to keep. Military theory teaches preparation. This moment teaches adaptation. The tank crew didn't wait for orders. They didn't ask permission. They didn't debate doctrine. They acted. That instinct changed the outcome. The lesson is not about tanks, or ships, or weapons. The lesson is simple. Never assume the enemy cannot hurt you. Every military failure begins with that belief. Because today's wars are changing again. New technology, new tactics, new assumptions. And somewhere someone will break the rules again. Just like that tank crew did. Imagine it one last time. A calm ocean. Smoke rising, waves carrying oil and steel. A single tank on the shore. Its engine cooling. Its crew silent. No applause. No witnesses. Just history being written quietly. Whenever this story is told, one question always appears in the comments. Is this real or exaggerated? The doubt is understandable. A tank sinking a warship sounds like fiction. But this event survives not because of rumors. It survives because of multiple independent records. American after-action reports. Japanese naval loss logs. Veteran testimony. Battlefield location analysis. Individually, they raise questions. Together, they confirm the impossible. Some historians try to weaken the story by changing definitions. They ask, was it a warship or an armed transport? Was it already damaged? Did other weapons assist? But here's the truth. It was an armed Japanese naval vessel, under military command, conducting wartime operations, and the final decisive damage came from tank fire. History is not about comfort, it's about facts. Other land weapons have damaged ships, coastal artillery, field guns, rocket batteries. But this was different. This was a mobile, armored vehicle, not designed for naval combat, acting without naval coordination. That is why this remains the only confirmed case of its kind. The biggest myth is that the tank one-shot the ship. That is false. This was not luck. This was repeated, deliberate fire at a vulnerable target. The ship died slowly, and that's exactly why it sank. Hollywood teaches us explosions. Reality teaches us pressure and time. Another myth says the Japanese ship was defenseless. It wasn't. It had on-deck guns, machine guns, trained crew. But those weapons were positioned for sea threats, not a hidden shoreline tank. The ship wasn't weak. It was caught in the wrong position at the wrong time. That mistake cost everything. Absolutely. If the ship had fired even once accurately, the Sherman would have been obliterated. A naval shell doesn't need precision. Near is enough. That is why this moment is so rare. The tank survived not because it was strong, but because the ship never recovered fast enough to respond. Tank crews were never trained to fire on ships. There was no manual, no drill, no instruction. This was human instinct under pressure. See threat, evaluate range, fire. That instinct separates survivors from casualties in war. Military academies teach repeatable doctrine. This event cannot be repeated. It depended on the geography, timing, enemy error, crew courage. You can't build a doctrine on coincidence, so it remains a case study, not a lesson plan. If a modern tank tried this today, satellites would detect it, drones would track it, missiles would destroy it. The tank would never fire a single round. This story belongs to a vanished era. That's what makes it powerful. This was not a planned victory. It was not doctrine. It was not strategy. It was a moment. A moment when land defeated sea, steel broke steel, logic failed. An American tank sank a Japanese warship. Once. Only once. And it will never happen again.